Welcome. In today's information analysis, we're embarking on a truly magnificent journey through human history. If you've ever found yourself wondering how on earth humanity went from wandering tribes to, well, the architects of massive empires and incredibly complex societies, you are in the exact right place. We're going to look closely at the absolute building blocks of our world. I want you to think about this for a second. How exactly did small, muddy riverbank villages transform into today's highly organized modern states? Because, it wasn't magic, and it definitely didn't happen overnight. It was this deliberate, often pretty painful, and just incredibly fascinating evolution of human cooperation, ingenuity, and, yeah, sometimes serious conflict. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap, what I like to call the hero's journey of society. We'll start with foundations of civilization and rivers, then move into ancient law and theology, check out the rise of democracy and struggle, transition into medieval society and religion, and finally cap it off with the growth of cities and education. So kicking things off with part one, foundations of civilization and rivers, or as I like to call it, building society straight from the mud. Now, before we look at where it all started, we really need to know what it actually is. A civilization is defined as an advanced social, political, economic, cultural, and technological system of human life. But hey, that's not just a fancy buzzword. To actually call a society civilized, it needs some concrete, functional elements, right? We're talking organized governments, bustling urban life, writing systems, formal laws, and the most advanced technology of its time. It is literally the ultimate system of human organization. Now, you might hear the words culture and civilization tossed around interchangeably, but they are actually distinctly different. Think of culture as the spiritual, mental beliefs, the arts, and the traditions, basically the internal soul of a people. Civilization, on the other hand, is the material, institutional, and organized development. It's the external, physical manifestation of their progress. So culture is the soul, and civilization is the grand structure that houses it. So where did these massive grand structures first pop up? Literally right in the mud on the banks of major river valleys. We've got the Nile in Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates over in Mesopotamia, the Indus in India, and the Huanghe in China. These rivers were absolutely crucial. They were the ultimate catalysts for human progress. And why? Well, they provided this incredibly fertile silt for farming and vital water for irrigation. They were essentially the superhighways of the ancient world. All this reliable food led to a huge population boom, which directly birthed the very first cities. That brings us to part two, ancient law and theology. This is all about establishing the rules of order. Because once you have thousands of people living together, you desperately need rules. Which brings us to the number 282. That isn't just some random figure. That is the massive number of specific laws that King Hammurabi of Babylon meticulously carved right into giant stone pillars for absolutely everyone to see. It was one of the ancient world's absolute earliest written legal codes, and honestly, a brilliant way to centralize his justice system across a massive empire. And this brilliantly illustrates a core philosophy you've probably heard before, an eye for an eye. Hammurabi's code covered absolutely everything. We're talking property, marriage, business, and debt. But here's the catch. The punishments were tied directly to your social class. If you broke the bone of an elite, your bone was broken. But if you broke the bone of a commoner, you just paid a fine. It was incredibly harsh, for sure, but it provided some much-needed, predictable order to Mesopotamian society. Meanwhile, over in ancient Persia, order was being built not just through state law, but through profound theology. The great religious reformer Zoroaster introduced a powerful philosophy centered on a supreme god, Ahura Mazda. He framed the whole universe as this grand, epic struggle between truth and lies, and the guiding principle for everyday folks was actually pretty simple. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. This belief system completely shaped Persian culture, bringing a heavy focus on morality, truthfulness, and even introduced concepts like karma, judgment, and the afterlife into the civic consciousness. All right, let's head west for Section 3, the rise of democracy and struggle, or as we can call it, the birth of the civic voice. Let's move to ancient Greece and see how this builds, step by step. Because democracy definitely wasn't built in a day. It was a deliberate ladder. First up, you have Draco, who replaced arbitrary oral judgments with strict written laws. Then, Solon steps in with some major reforms, crucially reducing crippling debt slavery. Next, Cleisthenes expanded things by strengthening the actual democratic foundation and increasing citizen participation. And finally, under Pericles, the Athenian assembly fully developed. letting citizens directly vote on major decisions. Though, quick aside, we definitely have to remember that this early democracy still entirely excluded women, slaves, and foreigners. Now, over in ancient Rome, the civic voice didn't emerge through some smooth evolution. No, it was a bitter head-to-head battle for political survival, known as the conflict of the orders. On one side, you've got the patricians, the wealthy, elite ruling class holding absolutely all the power. And on the other side, the plebeians. These were the common citizens who did literally all the heavy lifting for society, but were completely denied basic political rights. So what exactly happens when the plebeians finally push back? Well, their relentless struggle yielded massive, game-changing results. They forced the creation of the tribune of the plebes, just to protect their interests. They got their laws officially written down in the 12 tables. They actually won the right to hold high office and even legally intermarry with the patricians. And ultimately, under a law called the Lex Hortensia, decisions made by the plebeian assembly became fully binding for everyone. This class struggle literally forged the foundation of the mighty Roman Republic. That, as we know, empires eventually fall. Moving into Section 4, Medieval Society and Religion, where we'll look at the restructuring of medieval life. To really grasp the Middle Ages, you have to understand the feudal hierarchy. This was a completely land-based economic and military system. In a world with zero strong central government, land quite literally equaled absolute power. At the very top, you have the king, who grants land to the lords. Those lords then gave portions of that land to knights in exchange for military service. And at the very bottom, the peasants. Under this manorial system, peasants were tightly bound to the land. They had to provide grueling labor and taxes to the lords just to survive. It was a super rigid hierarchy where everyone knew exactly where they belonged. But while feudalism divided people physically, religion was busy uniting them spiritually. Let's look at the trajectory of Christianity. It all starts in the 1st century with Jesus teaching a pretty radical message of love and equality. Now, this resonated deeply with the poor and oppressed, and thanks to early communicators and the vast Roman road network, the idea spread like wildfire. By 313 AD, the Edict of Milan legally protected it. And then, in a massive turn of events, by 380 AD, this grassroots movement actually becomes the official state religion, serving as the absolute spiritual backbone of medieval Europe. But, of course, humanity rarely stays still for long, which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the growth of cities and education. This is all about the great escape from feudalism. Between the 11th and 13th centuries, things start to shift dramatically. Increased agriculture meant way more food, which led to a population surge. Plus, the Crusades inadvertently forced a massive trade expansion, opening up totally new routes. This led to way better crafts and the rise of incredibly powerful merchant guilds. Suddenly, you have a totally new bourgeoisie, a wealthy middle class emerging. And brilliantly, they used all this new trade wealth to literally buy their independence directly from those feudal lords. Urban life was officially back. And you know what comes with the wealth and freedom of these newly vibrant cities? A massive intellectual awakening. The rise of these cities is directly connected to the birth of organized higher learning. We're talking about places like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford becoming the very first hubs of the university system. Students gathered there to listen to lectures delivered entirely in Latin, engage in these super lively debates called disputations, and learn from teachers who are seen as primary guides for both moral and intellectual development. Now, what's really interesting about this is just how rigidly this medieval education was organized. Before you could even touch advanced subjects like law or medicine, you had to master the absolute foundations. You started with the trivium, which was grammar, logic, and rhetoric, just to learn exactly how to think and argue properly. Only then did you tackle the quadrivium, math, geometry, music, and astronomy, to understand the physical universe. It was this comprehensive, step-by-step system meant to build a perfectly well-rounded mind. We've journeyed all the way from the muddy banks of those first rivers where early humans planted seeds and built states, straight through to the complex halls of the first universities. We've seen laws carved in stone and democracy fiercely fought for in the streets. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this question. Our ancestors built the foundations of the world we live in today. They left behind a massive legacy of institutions, laws, and knowledge. Looking around at our modern world today, what legacy is our civilization leaving behind for the future? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.